Hello and welcome back to another episode of Gaslighting the Warfighter, number 23. Yeah, that's right. We're getting up there in the numbers, and unfortunately, we have another situation that we need to share with the veteran community about, toxic exposure. We thought we had this thing under control, and we, got some legislation passed on the Hill this time about a year ago. But here we are talking about another instance of toxic exposure amongst military personnel on a military installation within the 50 states of the United States. So wrap your head around that one, ladies and gentlemen. But this is an interesting story. I'm sure you guys have heard about it, over the course of the last year and a half. And we're talking specifically about the Red Hill water contamination with those lovely forever chemicals. The stuff that's killing us all. Thanks, GE. But I would like to bring on to our show. I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because that's the world that we live in today. But I'd like to bring onto the show somebody that's been running point on this. Her husband was the first plaintiff in the lawsuit against the United States Navy. And I'd like to welcome to the show Mandy Feindt. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tim, for having me.
Absolutely. So you've come all the way over to Hawaii to tell us a little bit about what's going on with the Red Hill water contamination. What's exactly going on?
Well, to be clear, I was stationed in Hawaii for about 2 years, but we received a compassionate reassignment once our family was deemed super sick, and we knew that we no longer wanted to live in a house that was making us sick. So we actually live in Colorado Springs now.
Lovely place.
It is, and we are, for many reasons, obviously, we are very happy to be there, and now getting the medical care that we need and so desperately wanted and needed when we were in Hawaii. Yeah.
Perfect. Now, tell us a little bit about what you're being treated for. What happened at Red Hill?
Certainly. So Red Hill for those who don't know, is a bulk storage facility that, supplies fuel to the greater Indo-Pacific area of operations. And it's an underground storage facility that's been in existence for about 80 years. It sits about 100 feet over the Oahu's Soul Aquifer, right? And so that's dangerous. And
it's brilliant. It's brilliant planning.
Yes, very much so, or not. But, so this asset, this military asset, American military asset on American soil, has been linking and, harming the environment and people for years. So in May of 2021, which happens to be when we moved into this amazing home, we lived in a 100-year-old home that was part of the historic trail. It survived the attack on Pearl Harbor. I can't tell you how grateful we were to live in this beautiful home and raise our kids in that, living history, part of history. And that's why when our family started getting sick, almost immediately, we never once considered that it was the water. My son was 13 months at the time. He had, rashes just waist down, and he's, not showering or anything at that point. So water just submerged waist down. We never considered that it was the water. In fact, I was buying a baby bath soak and continuing to soak him, thinking I was soothing it. But, I have a lot of mom guilt because now I know that I was making that worse. So initial symptoms for all of, not just our family, because again, we represent one of 93,000 people that were impacted by this crisis. But as a community, we have experienced rashes, skin rashes, a lot of vertigo, headaches. My husband's experienced ocular migraines, vestibular dysfunction disorders, where it kind of just feels like you're walking like the Michelin Man, walking on an airplane that's sort of unstable to go to the bathroom. A lot of respiratory issues. Both of my kids have lung damage, gastrointestinal issues, tremors in the hands, a lot of neurological type symptoms. And that's sort of, very lethargic. We were just always tired, brain fog, you name it. I mean, I feel like it's attacked our entire system at this point. But that sort of went on. And then in November of 2021 was this massive spill, 20,000 gallons that compromised the drinking water. And there was no denying it at that point. Many people cooked their Thanksgiving meal with contaminated water. You're showering in it, you are cooking your food with it, you're washing your clothes in it, you're filling up your baby's bottles with formula and contaminated water. So many people got sick, ended up in the hospital, and were evacuated. We were evacuated from our home for about 3 months.
Yeah. That's incredible. Incredible. But, it is not something that I've heard for the first time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Right? We just learned recently USS Nimitz We had fuel contamination, JP5, JP8 being, somehow introduced into the water lines, and everybody on the ship drinking it, showering in it, cooking with it. It blows my mind. But this one is particularly interesting. I got a couple pieces of literature here that I downloaded for the show, and I'm trying to get my head wrapped around it all. You're saying that the bulk storage facilities resting on top of one of the largest aquifers on the Hawaiian Islands. And this bulk fuel facility is processing 4.11 million gallons a day flowing through that facility, contaminating 93, nearly everybody on the installation. What's the size of that installation?
So it's interesting because it makes up the Navy drinking water system, feeds about 20 to 25 different neighborhoods. So housing, military base housing, but then you've got, Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, you've got historic Fort Island, Camp Smith, Fort Chapter, Tripler, Army Medical Center. You've got all of these areas. And then you have Pearl City Peninsula, you've got Iroquois Point, which I would love to, talk about them because that piece of land used to be occupied by the Navy. So the Navy pipes were out in that area. Many years ago, it was given back to the people of Hawaii. And so the majority of that community are civilians. They're local Hawaiians. They are not green suiters. They're not military families. And they've been offered no assistance. In fact, for the longest time, they were denied even knowing if they were on the drinking water system. And so, it has 93,000 people. So you either worked there, you lived there every night, our children not only lived there, but they also went to the on-base child development center where they spent, 9-10 hours a day. They couldn't escape the exposure.
Right.
There are on-base schools. Commissary, the biggest NEX, right, in the world, is there. And so let's talk about Pearl Harbor, right? One of the top 3 visited historic sites in the world. Probably about 4,000 people, I think it is, that come there each day. So if you've washed your hands, drink from their water fountains,
Probably poisoned.
you probably have been.
Yeah. That's incredible. That's
Yeah.
incredible. And I think the in the conversations you and I were having, I think the most peculiar part about this, and it's used peculiar loosely, is that they went on for a long period of time saying that there was nothing going on, like that. All of this is just is incorrect, and there's other things going on. 1,100 gallons of AFFF being dumped into the soil, 20,000 gallons of fuel being dumped into the soil, and ultimately leaking into the drinking water, the aquifer. Hold my hand here. The most recent operations report. We'll show this. They're saying as of recent January 2023. Perfect. No problems. Nothing at all. Tip top, guys. But not even a month earlier, almost to the day, right? Kathleen Ho, Deputy Director of Environmental Health within the state of Hawaii, puts out a department memo to everybody in Hawaii, right? Saying, you are hereby notified that a release or threat of a release of a hazardous substance as defined in Section 128D-1 has occurred or is threatening to occur at the above described facility, of which you are believed to be the owner, operator, transporter, generator, yada, yada. So this was a notice to the United States Navy saying that there was a problem. But the Navy's saying, whoa, hey, guys, there's no problem here. We're just great stewards of the land, and we are keeping up to the highest traditions of making sure that everybody in our control, everybody in our care is being taken care of. Right, and we just look across, all the branches of service to know that's a complete bold-faced fucking lie.
Yeah, one word comes to mind, and that's gaslighting. I imagine that's why you have me here on Gaslighting the Warfighter.
Indeed.
We have, since the very beginning, we have received emails from the base command saying there is no indication that your water is not safe, and we received those emails before they ever tested water. They did come out and test my personal home on base. They tested our kids' child development center, and when I asked for test results for those after my kids end up in the ER,
Right.
I was told, Major Feindt, you can file a FOIA request for those test results. We have been told, we have been gaslighted. The Navy, the military sort of owned the conversation of there's been no detection. There's nothing that exceeds the environmental action levels. And I think this is important to discuss because the EPA, right, the Environmental Protection Agency, their sole job in life is to protect our environment and our drinking water. But there's a petroleum exclusion, and they don't regulate jet fuel, TPH, in water. So when that happens, they push it down to the Hawaii State Department, the individual state, which is who that lady is, right? She works for the State Department. And they set the environmental action levels, and they are in bed, they work hand in hand with, our military, right? The folks who have the largest pot of money of any government agency. And they set these environmental action levels. And right now, the state of Hawaii has assumed risk at 266 parts per billion. And when I've asked, as a parent of very young children, of a 1 and a 3-year-old at that time, I said, well, at what body weight did you consider in these calculations? And they said, well, Major Feindt, we've considered, children, at 15 kilograms. And I'm like, I'm not good at public math, but that's 33 pounds. And you tell me what babies come out at 33 pounds? And both of my kids at 1 and 3, they weren't 33 pounds.
Sure.
And so there's been an entire population. We know a lot of people who live on base that have young children, right? That weren't even considered, at risk. They didn't assume risk for those folks.
Absolutely. Now, this is a trick question.
Okay.
How'd that FOIA request go?
I still to this day, 15 months later, we don't know. We don't know how much we drank. We still don't have the answer to those test results. I have voice recordings from the 10th of December of the NCO that came to my house and tested. And about 2 months later, I have a voice recording from the lieutenant commander who said, Major Feindt, we've looked in our databases. We just can't find your test results anywhere. Like, how convenient. So, there's several articles out that have claimed that the military disposed of those water test results. In fact, they didn't start charting test results until they brought in these granular activation systems and started flushing the systems and were able to get the results to pass that 266 parts per billion.
Yeah.
But about flushing, I'd really love to tell you this, Tim. I'm sure you get a kick out of this. We have this amazing operation called flushing operations, and all we did is we drained hot water heaters. We never replaced the hot water heaters. And then we hooked hoses up to the outsides of the homes, and we just ran the water for about an hour.
Right back into the soil.
Into the soil. So you had animals, pets dying. Yeah. You had turtles dying. You had, from being in the lagoons around the housing areas, fish. And our kids, I know you have kids too, right? So I could buy my kids all the presents in the world, but they would rather play in the dirt, right? They'd rather be outside, playing in a pool and playing outside. And so it was very scary for us. And in fact, still to this day, in Hawaii, they call, when it rains, it's called a Hawaiian blessing. But there are many people who it's not a blessing anymore because when it rains, that protrusion, that air, people start with the itchy skin again. Their eyes are irritated. They get the cough again because they just dumped it into the soil. It just spewed out of fire hydrants. And the other thing about the hot water heaters, so I told you they didn't replace them. They didn't replace the hookups for the washers and dryers and the dishwashers and the refrigerators, right? All plastic things that hold onto contamination. Much like if you were to cook a spaghetti dinner, put it in a plastic bowl, you still have that residue. That's the same thing with porous materials. It holds on to that contamination. So because they haven't replaced all of that, you know what they do when they come out and test the homes now? They only test the cold water, not the hot water, because they haven't replaced the hot water heaters.
Sure, yeah, so crazy.
And they refuse to do air quality testing. So we're very lucky, as you mentioned, to have really great legal team who did bring in private vendors to get air quality and things like that. Yeah.
And that's a challenging aspect, right? Is now, you guys, the plaintiffs within this case are having to go and spend gobs of money,
thousands of dollars,
to have all these things tested, right? Because now you're having I don't know, the murderer at the crime scene doing the investigation. Does that make sense to anybody?
Doing the investigation, doing the monthly monitoring, doing the testing, providing the medical care,
right.
Overseeing all of it. And by the way, making the decisions on what is safe, making the decisions on when you can move back into the homes that made you sick, making the decision to not pay you hazardous duty pay for living in a hazardous situation.
Right.
That's something that I have fought as an advocate and as a human resources officer in the military. There's a lot of things that I cannot control, but what I can control is pay, promotion, things like that. And so part of my job is making sure people get paid. And, you've put people in a hazardous, toxic environment. And we're talking about, when I was in the 82nd, I jumped once a quarter, right? $150 a month. We're asking for $150 a month for our soldiers who were subjected to live, work, and were put on these details to clean up the toxic exposure without proper PPE, personal protective equipment. And we can't pay them $150 a month?
That's not in the budget. That's for the war machine.
The largest budget in the government.
Right. We're talking, I think it's at $800 billion this year, the NDA 2023. So yeah, it simply blows my mind. And the one thing that I keep is a head scratcher for me is like, we keep saying that we have the best and brightest minds in the United States military, and I do believe that to a reasonable degree. But what we have is this. The hardest challenge in the world is for the military to actually learn from the mistakes that it inflicts upon itself, right? Because we can go back, to the late '80s, right, which was part of the PACT Act, and look at the Camp Lejeune water poisoning that happened there, and the thousands of families that it destroyed. It's the same exact issue. The same exact issue.
It's a mirror image, Tim. And immediately, we are so grateful for our VSOs and our veterans community, particularly the Camp Lejeune families who have opened their arms to us. Sort of the face of that case has been Mike Pertain and Jerry Ensminger, and those guys reached out to me immediately when I did my first congressional trip about this situation. They have been mentors of mine. And in fact, I went down and visited Jerry over Thanksgiving break. And, he had a daughter who was exposed around my daughter's age. She was diagnosed with leukemia at 5 years old, which is how old my daughter is today. And he buried her at the age of 9. And there's an entire graveyard, and I don't say that lightly, of children who have died because of their exposure. And I'm grateful for Jerry and the Mike Partains and the Camp Lejeune community, but as a mother, that their lives are my greatest fear.
Yeah.
And I'd like to circle back to something you said about how we are, we're an elite organization, some of the best and the brightest. And one thing that is really concerning to me is that there's this sense of pride, and we've done that when we've governed ourselves with other things like sexual assault and things like that. It's almost, we have too much pride to bring in true subject matter experts. Like, this is not water contamination. These sort of toxic exposures have proved with burn pits and everything else not to be our area of expertise. But there are people who have studied Camp Lejeune and burn pits and the impacts of, fuel is not new, right? So what brought down the Twin Towers, right? Two planes, a lot of fuel. If they survived it, they inhaled that. Burn pits, what do we ignite it with? Fuel. Same things that's in Camp Lejeune water is in ours. People have studied this stuff for decades, but we refuse to bring those folks to the island to do an epidemiologist study, to provide us medical care, to bring in the best of the best, because there's just too much pride. And I truly believe it's too much of a cover-up. It's too much of a risk to bring other folks in, because then they might realize how sick people are. The part that bothers me, and I'm a mother first, I'm an active duty service member. I'm proud to serve. I have proudly served for many years, and I want to continue that service because I think, quite frankly, the military needs people who are compassionate about people first. But I truly believe that we've got to focus more on like public health over public messaging, like people first over politics. Like, those are the things that we've got to get back to.
Yeah. Being an old salty Marine, right? It was, mission first and then, troop welfare, right? And I get it, right? And there's nothing that we're talking about here that is not putting the mission first, right? Because if you don't have troop welfare and the ability to make sure that these men and women are in the best positions that they can to go fight these wars, then you don't have a mission. Right, so it's the proverbial chicken before the egg. But what we continue to see over and over and over again, and that's why I love this program. And this program is not to besmirch the military. This is not to bring down one of the greatest organizations in human existence. Right, it's here to hold us all accountable. Right, because we talk about in the military that accountability is what makes the United States military different than any other organization on the planet. Okay, great. Let's hold ourselves accountable, right? And even when we take off that uniform and we're now proud members of a civilian society, I have a much better opportunity and a much better responsibility to hold the military accountable, because recruitment as much as our responsibility as it is the military's responsibility, right? And that's where the big conversation comes to where why are the recruitment numbers down so high in our current generation in America? Well, could it be the way that we treat our active duty military members, and then our sons and daughters are looking at that and saying, why would I ever want to be a part of this? Nobody's going to take responsibility for the things that happen to me that I'm being exposed to, or that I'm dying from. That is, that by the very government that I signed my name to. And that's a big problem, right? And this goes out to any of you 4-star generals out there that are still, that are sitting at a desk. Like, you're wrong. Use your position to change what is going on, change the outcomes, right? You didn't rise up through the ranks to sit there and not do what is right, right? You're not there to protect the institution. As families are dying, I do not agree with that.
Yeah, there's a couple things with that. So I hear your motto, but our motto in the Army is mission first, people always, right? People first. People are our greatest asset. I have sold those slogans. I was a recruiter. I was an ROTC instructor at the collegiate level as a commander. I have shaken a lot of parents' hands and said, your kids, we've got your kids. They are joining one of the most elite organizations, and we're going to take care of them, and this is a family. And I have truly believed that my entire career. I told you when I received my compassionate reassignment, I was given a choice to take the job that I have now at Northcom in Colorado Springs, or take a job at Georgetown University, which is one of the best ROTC programs. Would have been right there next to the Pentagon, and right next to the Capitol Hill, where I've been lobbying for the past year. And people question why I didn't take that job. And for me, there's a lot of recruitment in that, and it was very hard for me at that time, after the military had poisoned my children, to sell that Army story. And like I said, I'm still here. I still love the military. I still love every service member who has raised their right hand and volunteered to serve our amazing country. But it is hard. And we start talking about recruiting numbers. I have a great deal of respect for the Secretary of the Army, first woman, and in that position. But, recently she came to the island of Oahu, just like every other dignitary, the Secretary of the Navy, the Secretary of Defense. President Biden landed, there, and not one person has made a public statement about Red Hill. And so the Secretary of the Army came, and her sole mission was to talk about quality of life issues. Mm-hmm. And she knows, she's well aware, because I've conversed back and forth with her, email exchange, all of that about Red Hill. And it hurt my heart, because I thought, for sure, this lady's going to come over and she's going to show them how the Army treats people, right? And she didn't meet with a single Red Hill impacted family. She had this big town hall. There were protesters from the Oahu Water Protectors, the folks who created these shirts, the Shut Down Red Hill shirts, saying, Sec Army, please meet with Red Hill families. Especially, you're here to talk about quality of life, like I said. You've got service families living in tents, Tim, outside of their homes because they don't believe that the water and the air quality in their home is safe. Yeah. You've got folks 15 months later still showering with water bottles and using alternate water sources. And don't take my word for it. The CDC, ATSDR, has done 2 back-to-back studies that will show that 80% of those people are still using an alternate water source. And guess how they're paying for it? Out of their pocket.
Yeah. As we see the food insecurities rise within active duty military and all the pressures of the economy, mm-hmm. and Hawaii is not a cheap place to live, mm-hmm. right? And the offsets that the military is providing these families is not enough to chase the economy. It's an all around shit show.
It's disheartening.
Yes.
There is this sense of, for the first time in my career, and I've seen a lot in my career as a sexual assault victim advocate. That's a very sensitive subject. I've seen a lot. I've been able to get through a lot. I'm also a master resiliency trainer. So I've been provided a lot of skills to get through a lot of adversity in the military. But this has been institutional betrayal. It's a sense of being betrayed and left behind. And, it's ingrained in us as leaders, as advocates, that if you see something, say something. Mm-hmm. When it comes to a matter of public health and safety, if you've seen your brothers and sisters in arms be harmed, you step up and you intervene and you say something. And I feel like that's exactly what I've done and a lot of my compadres have done. And it hasn't turned out very well for us, right? Like, it hasn't... what they've encouraged us to do is not. There's been a lot of retaliation.
Sure.
But again, I go back to. Yes, I'm very close to the end of my career, right? There's a lot of risk in that, but the greater risk here far outweighs that risk to my career. And like I said, when I started this, like, I'm a mother first.
Yeah. Now, do you feel like you will be retaliated against as you get more and more in front of this conversation?
This has been going on for a while. I filed a Department of Defense whistleblower protection complaint February of last year. So it's been going on for quite some time. I don't know what else it is that they could do to me at this point besides take my career from me. But again, it's just not enough for me as a mother, as a leader, when I see that so many of my fellow service members have been harmed.
Right.
And as a gracious tenant and a steward of the profession, a gracious tenant of that island, of the native people of Hawaii, this was a predominantly military families were predominantly impacted, but there are many civilians, many Native Hawaiians who fear. I mean, there's a greater issue here, right? Like, we get to leave with PCSs and every 2 to 3 years. This is their home island. They live off of their land. These are their resources. And every Native Hawaiian mother out there lives with the same fear that I do as a mother. And so I care deeply though I'm not Hawaiian, I care deeply for that island and for its people.
Yeah. Now, the people that are, on the other side of this conversation, how can you look them in the face and be like, how are you even wearing the same uniform as me?
How do you sleep at night?
How do you sleep at night? How do you pray to your God?
I've had many uncomfortable conversations with folks who far outrank me. And I've looked at them and said, hey, listen, I realize that I may be out of line here or there when it comes to rank, but I don't care about the rank on your chest or mine. I respect your position, but I know you're a father. I know you're a parent, just like I am. And I'm asking you, what would you do if this happened to your children?
Sure.
I don't know how people live. I don't know how people sleep and rest their head at night knowing that, it's one thing for us, right? Us service members and us veterans. When we raise our right hand, we knew that there's inherent risk, right? Mm-hmm. And but our families who already sacrificed so much, they didn't volunteer for this.
Right.
Innocent civilians have been poisoned on American military soil by an American asset. And it is no big deal, apparently. Most folks here on the mainland don't even know about this crisis.
Right.
Yeah.
It'll happen again and again and again. So what is the resolution that you're looking for?
I've gone to Congress a couple of times. There are certain pieces of legislation that we're looking at, very big level things to the basic ask, which I talked about before, is, hazardous duty pay for service members. For our civilians, there is no piece of legislation out there that covers civilians. The PACT Act is huge. And I'm so grateful to be partnered up with Burn Pits 360. They've sort of helped us out. And we know that we as service members will be covered under the PACT Act, under the toxic exposure, piece of legislation there. But our family members won't. There's nothing out there that covers any civilian who has been harmed by the government in a toxic exposure situation. There's nothing there for them.
Yeah.
It only covers us, and I'm grateful that it does as a service member, but it doesn't cover, our innocent civilians. So there's that. There's hazardous duty pay. There is obviously compensation, medical care, medical monitoring, and the biggest thing is getting those subject matter experts on the island and properly treating and testing these people. Like you had mentioned, people are spending thousands of dollars out of pocket because not only being gaslighted in a sense that this is a big deal, right? You see these reports, but that there's any sort of long-term health impact. And that's frustrating. We, especially as parents, want to know what's in our kids' bodies. We want to know about the long-term health impacts. We want to be different than Camp Lejeune. We don't want to be fighting this decades later. This is happening right now in real time, and we have an opportunity to intervene and to save a lot of people's lives right here.
Yeah. And I was doing some research on that because I didn't know what AFFF was. I'm like, it's a foam? What is it, sprayed on fires? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But, Looking at the SDS sheets, right, whatever they are now, like there was nothing in there that talks about anything other than skin rash and the effects of this chemical on the surface of your skin. Does it say there's no data collected on ingestion? Why? Well, I mean, that's a legitimate question, everybody. Why is that not a subject of carcinogenic? Should not be induced to intestines or things of that nature, right? Polyfluoroalkyl is. They got a really great readout of all the PFAS and all the PFOS and all the other forever chemicals. But when it comes to this particular compound or a mixture of chemicals, yeah, just don't get it on your skin. Everything else should be fine. Like that to me is just incredulous. It just doesn't make sense. And but it gives the government, and it gives most specifically the Department of Defense, the ability to be wiggly and squirm around it and be squishy, because they're saying, well, there's nothing here that says that this is dangerous other than it causes rashes. Mm-hmm. So for all those guys that are sitting out in their tents outside their home and spending thousands of dollars on their own water, as an officer, I could be like, well, those kids are just dumb, because there's nothing here that says that's the case.
I would argue that we were the dumb ones to believe from the very beginning, when folks were telling us there's no indication that your water was unsafe. I harvest a lot of guilt as a parent for doing what I've done my entire career, which is listening to the leadership, the folks who were put in charge and entrusted with a great responsibility. But I wholeheartedly regret that decision because it has impacted not only my family, but so many innocent families. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the good news is it sounds like they're going to turn Red Hill off and abandon that in 2027. So those families only have a few more years of pain and suffering.
It is pretty monumental, right? I do believe in the power of people. Yeah. I believe in the power of social media. That's why I greatly appreciate, you all using this platform to amplify the voices of Red Hill and our veterans community. Like, we could not be more grateful. But, like I said, this has been around for 80 years, right? This is not the first time. There has been thousands of gallons of fuel that have leaked. But the fact that, the Department of Defense, the Secretary of Defense, Austin, came to Hawaii and he made a decision to shut down the facility, that is huge, right? And if I truly believe that if we weren't speaking out about it, if so many people went and gotten sick, he wouldn't have done that. So I do think that is a great initiative, and that is an amazing effort, and that should be done, right? However, like you mentioned, it's going to take all of these years, because now, they've got every excuse under the sun. And I can imagine with China knocking on our back door, that there is a sense of, well, we're going to need this fuel potentially, or whatever that might be. But at the same time, like, there are other ways to fastly defuel and to store that fuel somewhere else. But they've come up with every excuse under the sun as to why it's going to take so long. Like, they need to perform all this maintenance so they can safely defuel it.
Safely.
Like, every day that fuel sits in those tanks is another day that, you risk thousands of lives. And so we as military families are obviously not happy about the length of that. And I'll tell you who is ultimately not happy about it. Again, it is those people who live there. Yeah. Those Hawaiian families who live there, and that fuel continues the plume just continues to grow. Yeah. And every day those Hawaiians are at risk not to be able to raise their families and live off their land as they have done for,
sure.
many
I mean,
years.
I'm sure we could, hire the, brilliant minds of, the gentleman that set the fire to the fuel tanks over there in East Palestine, and we'll just burn the top layer of that water off down there in the aquifer, and it'll be all right. It'll be all right. But I make jokes about it, and it's not really, it's more sarcastic humor than anything else, because like what's happening at Red Hill, you're seeing the same instance, lesser from a military perspective, but a government response or lack of response in East Palestine, and with this hydrofluorocarbons or whatever the hell that's burning out over there. that's killing, the wildlife and all life as we know it, right? They're probably not going to be able to go back to that little town.
I've obviously been following that story very closely, just as I followed the story that happened short after us, on the Navy ship, and those young sailors showing pictures. I'm like, reach out to me, parents. If you have a kid that's like, reach out to us because we can help you. But I have been following, obviously, the derailment very closely. And the same thing, I've had many of conversations with the EPA. Obviously, I met the administrator of the EPA, Mike Reagan. He came over. I sat with him at a picnic table. His secret security, watched my kids. And I just said, sir, this is your job, right? Let's not, why is the Navy running this? Why is the military running this? This is your job. And that's when I was sort of briefed on these 4 M's, and I can't think of all of them. Money was one, mortality, and all of these things. And I'm thinking to myself, how many kids have to die before you actually do your job, before you actually care? And that's the same thing. I've been watching the same things with those folks in Ohio. They're being told the same BS that we were in. It's a sense of gaslighting. It's they don't want to spark this concern, but you don't think that people are concerned.
Right.
You think if
As
you just
I'm looking out the window, filling my glass of water, and listening to the news saying there is no problem in Ohio right now, and there's dudes fishing dead fish out with nets and putting them in the bag so there's nobody can film that.
It's
what is
horrendous.
going on in this country?
What world do we live in?
Right? And I'm particularly, this whole military poisoning, obviously with the work with the PACT Act that we were involved in.
Yes.
But I think it hits a little bit closer home now. My son is in the Navy. He'll be next month joining the USS Nimitz as a gunner's mate on that ship. Right, and the first thing I said to him is son,
Don't drink the
don't drink the
water.
water, man. What do you need? You need to buy me one, or I'll buy you one of those straws. You can drink fuel out of a river, and you'll be okay. Tell me what you need. And he's like, oh, it's gonna be okay, Dad. The Navy's got me. Mm-hmm. Well, son, they don't, because they don't give a shit about.
How old is your son?
He's 18.
So the reason I've been so outspoken is because I'm an older mom. I got back from Afghanistan. I had melanoma skin cancer, after probably burn pit exposure. My husband and I got married. We could not have children naturally. We, like many women who have been exposed to burn pit exposure, we dealt with infertility issues, had infertility treatments with both kids, lost a baby in between. Now I've got kids in this world that it is my privilege to raise. And the military's poisoned them, right? And so I tell you that because, I dropped my kids off at the on-base child development center at 1 and 3. My husband and I are, mid-40s. I won't tell you how old I am. My husband's in his mid-40s. And we're dropping our children off with 18, 19, young, 20-year-old kids, and they have the same mindset, just as I did, right? Yeah. The military's got me. Many people continue to drink the water because they believed that the Navy's got me.
Yeah.
I believe that's why so many people got sick, is because they truly believed that. And so I feel like, as senior as I am in my career, and as a mother, and as someone who has, found my voice in the military, and as a leader, I feel like it's my duty and obligation to speak for people like your son who believe that the military's got them. And I do believe that we owe that to get those kids, right? Yeah. To get those young families who have made the honorable decision to serve our country.
Yeah, because what's next? Conscription. Because there's not many people joining anymore because they don't have any trust and faith in the fidelity of the government, right? And it's written right there in our promotion, right? You're honoring, the faith and fidelity of leadership, yada yada yada.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. So, what's next for you now? Where you've got legislation going on the Hill. Share a little bit of the legislation if you got a number, so people can follow it. Send letters to their congressmen and their senators. Where is that at?
So that has been a big thing. Is we are working. We're still in the very early stages of that. But the greatest way that you can help is to share this, to do your research on Red Hill, to share with your community, to write your congressmen and women to write the President of the United States, right? We talked State of the Union about, being betrayed and left behind. We talked about everyone, deserves the opportunity to have access to clean water. And so those things clearly aren't happening around the world, but they're certainly not happening in Hawaii. So I would ask that everyone, again, share, use your voices, and help us spread awareness about Red Hill. Also, we have a support page on Facebook. It is the JBPHH, Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam Contamination Support. We put a lot of information there. I'd also encourage you to follow the Oahu Water Protectors. You can find them on Facebook and Instagram. And then I'm Major_Feindt on Instagram.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. And you can check out, like I did, all this information on the State of Hawaii's Department of Health website right here. And you can read it with your own peepers. It's wrong, ladies and gentlemen. It's wrong. And people are getting sick. People are going to die from this if they haven't already. And that's unfortunate. And we could do better. And that's why Gaslighting the Warfighter exists, so we can bring these stories to you. We're not here trying to, again, dismantle or throw rocks or shade at the military. We're just here as active duty and veterans holding our military responsible, because that's the right thing to do. Thank you for having the courage to stand up and do this, especially still being on active duty. We understand. We all know how those things can come back like a bad boomerang, or wet toilet paper on your shoe. Just hang around for a long time. But I think the courage and the strength that you're showing on this particular issue, as a parent, I appreciate it, and it means a lot to me, and I'm sure it means a lot to other people out there that just haven't found their voice yet. Keep going out there, keep banging the drum. We'll continue to share this message, and hopefully we get some resolution.
Thank you so much.
Is there anything else you'd like to impart before we head out of here on this episode of Gaslighting the Warfighter?
No, I guess the last thing I would say is thank you. And again, if you're in the greater Hawaii area, or don't drink the water, and just be cognizant of your water, because this was not, certainly my area of expertise or something that I was, super passionate about. I certainly did my part with cycling, driving an electric vehicle, all those things. But, environmental concerns were not something that I was super passionate about. But I have learned a great deal. The military is the greatest polluter, right, in the United States. And so just be cognizant of that. Know your resources. Drink bottled water. Don't necessarily trust the water that's coming out of your home.
Fantastic. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. Make sure you share this episode. Very important information. A lot of places where you can go to find it. We want to thank the Feindt family for all of the work that they've been doing. And thank you again for tuning into this episode of Gaslighting the Warfighter number 23. If you're interested in learning more about all the other episodes that we have covered in the previous 22 episodes, you can download anywhere at any app store and get yourself some good old information that will change your life, I promise you. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, that is all we have at Gaslighting Warfighter. We'll see you again very soon. Until next time, wash your stinking hands, be kind to one another, and we'll see you soon.